What is the biggest I shouldn't have said that moment you've ever had right after you said it? My mum was in hospital. As it turns out, she would never leave the hospital. But at this stage she was sick, but not that sick. She had a private room with a little enclosed garden outside. She had a blue-tongued lizard who lived in the garden, and she would pass her long days watching the lizard scurry around and catch bugs and lazing in the sun. She would tell us every time we visited what the lizard had been up to, the funny things it had done, and made her smile during the day. She lit up when telling me about its adventures. One day when I came in to visit, the blue tongue was out the front of her room in the car park. It had been hit by a car and killed. I went to visit mum, and she was very sad. She hadn't seen her friend the lizard all day. I said to her, "Oh yeah, I saw him out in the car park. He won't be back. He got run over by a car." As soon as I said it, I tried to suck the words back in, but I couldn't. Her face crashed. She was crushed. I tried to say maybe it was another lizard, or that her lizard would be back, but it was no good. The damage was done. A week later she died. She had been in the hospital for 3 months, and was getting better they thought. But this day, she just died. They thought she had just given up. That was in 1996, 22 and a bit years ago. And I still wake from sleep thinking about that. I still shudder every time I recall how stupid I had been. I'm now a 50-year-old man, and I can never and will never forgive myself for that stupid statement. It still makes me cry. We had a friend of the family, my grandma's lifelong friend, who was labeled the crazy cat lady. She had several dozen cats. Most were feral and lived outside, but occasionally she'd nurse and tame sick kittens when they came around, and they'd become inside cats. Most had feline AIDS and left snotty marks on the walls from the constantly sick cats sneezing on them. The whole house reeked of ammonia from the dozen litter boxes she placed in her open garage and basement. Anyway, she was a kind lady, and after her husband passed it became my dad's personal responsibility to make sure all her heavy lifting was taken care of. So after all these years of sick cats and ignoring warnings from friends, naturally she gets bit and it gets infected. It was horrific. It just kept getting worse and worse to the point her foot had to be amputated. Cut to the point. One day my dad volunteers me to help him clean the litter and power wash her garage. I'm a dickhead teen at the time, so naturally I complain about how the smell makes me sick, and I hate cats, so why do I have to be the one to blah blah, I'm an entitled prick. So he informs me we need to help now more than ever, because the infection caused a chain reaction of health problems and she might not last much longer despite her sunny disposition to everything going on. To which I respond, so you could say she has a foot in the grave? I've never seen my dad look so disappointed. I wait tables for morning shift. There are 2 parts to the restaurant I work at, the dining room and the dessert counter for carry out. These 2 girls come in and are seated in the dining room. Instead of ordering with me, they head to the counter and order drinks. I deliver the drinks and immediately one girl comes at me so full of attitude that her order is incorrect and that our staff is rude. It's still really early in the morning and I'm in dire need of a vacation, but I bite my tongue and tell her I will fix it. I go back to my coworker that made the drinks and ask him to remake them. He's not happy about it, but remakes the drinks once we find the ticket proving he read it wrong. I go the girls' table and tell them the drink is being remade. They are continuing to be rude and catty, to the point I'm responding with beachy politeness. After having problems communicating with them, one of the girls says to me, "I don't know what that problem is." This is where I messed up. Remember, I'm in need of a vacation. I replied, "The problem is your attitude." Inside my head I just cringed and yelled no. The girl exclaimed, "Excuse me?" I decided to just own it and go with it. I have been at my job for a while and I know I'm not about to lose it. So, I repeated what I had said to her. She and her friend got mad at me and decided to leave. Take your $12 order at 7 AM and shove it, you overly catty. See you next Tuesday. Side note, I did not get in trouble. They had been rude and disrespectful to any of the staff they encountered. Edit, fixed my spelling error. When I was in 4th grade so I heard what I thought was an utterly hilarious joke from Air and Space. I can still remember it. It involved a pilot with a speech impediment and his reaction to the tower guys accidentally making a comment about it. I thought this was the funniest thing on earth. So at school I figured I'd tell it to the teacher I liked most, the computer teacher, who also had a speech impediment. I felt my heart fall into my shoes as he stared at me blankly and then went back to work. I knew I'd faked up bad. I also knew I had no idea how to save this situation. And he barely, if ever, talked to me again. I was at that school until 8th grade. Maybe there were situations that were more severe, or more important, or more damaging. But this is the one that's still stuck in my brain, 20 years later. Edit fine, since you guys wanna hear the joke. Remember I was like 9-ish, so to me this was the funniest thing ever to idiot young me. And I had no idea that was what you'd latch onto. A bunch of pilots were training at mock sub hunting runs out in the Pacific. Each pilot had a radio operator for them, but the operators could hear each other and the pilots in the control center. At one point one of the radio operators turned to one of his friends and said, "I swear my pilot sounds just like Elmer Fudd," because the pilot had a speech problem. It briefly goes dead silent in the room as he hadn't turned off his mic. He stares at it for a few seconds until the pilot says, quietly, "Be very very quiet. We are hunting submarines." I had just been rejected for a date by a friend of mine that I asked out. I asked her out to dinner and she suggested that we bring a third mutual friend with us. I said I'd rather not and that this was me asking her on a date more than anything. She declined. And then I screwed up. I texted said mutual friend because I felt I could talk to her about anything, telling her that I asked the other out on a date and that she rejected me. I don't remember exactly how it went, but I think she asked me what happened and how I felt about it, and I was answering her. At some point I ended up saying I was frustrated about this and that being friends with a girl I asked out feels like being a dog with a piece of meat being teased in front of his face. The mutual friend was like, "What the fuck, why would you say something like that?" and revealed that her best friend, the girl I asked on a date, was sitting right next to her watching the conversation unfold. I will never live that down. I will always have that night in the back of my mind, torturing me. Those two were indeed the best friends I ever had, and I ruined it, and there's no turning back, or making what I said go away. If such a thing is possible, I ruined my own reputation forever. Neither of them have communicated with me at all for about 5 years now. I miss them. Alright Reddit, here's my time to shine. I was waiting on this table of a sweet, older couple. I noticed earlier in the meal the man had on a hand brace thingy mabob because he was missing a finger. Yep, you see where this is going, don't ya? Well, fast forward to the end of their meal. I go to check on them, offer dessert, all that jazz, and go to grab his empty plate. What I say next is what I have always said to tables to be corny, because I've heard people snap at me, so I just want to be clear, before I dump their last few crumbs in the trash, that they are done. "Can I grab this out of your way, sir?" "Absolutely, I'm stuffed," he says. Got her ask laughs. "Wouldn't wanna lose a finger, oh god, what have I done? It's lose a hand, you dumbass." My face probably turned beet red. The wife laughed, and the old man did not, and put his head down. I brought them their check, they tipped just fine, and left. That was 4 years ago, and it is my worst foot in mouth moment. I still wonder to this day if it was a recent injury and he was self-conscious because he didn't laugh and didn't show his hand after that. Still haunts me when I wait on amputees. My ex called the cops on me when I was drinking from midnight till 7 AM. We had a non-physical argument. She just didn't like how I was laughing bullshit away. I'm gonna call the cops. Go ahead. See if I faking care. Cops show up. I'm drunk. She lets them in, and I'm like, whoa. You can't come in here. This is my faking house. She had no right to let you in. We argue back and forth. They start saying they should just arrest me. That's when I went bananas. You ever hear of the 4th and 14th Amendments? You are violating my rights just for being here. I can't leave because public intoxication and DUI, and here I'm breaking no laws. Is her face battered? Is the house in disarray? One of the cops was the shift commander, white shirt. There were 4 total. Then I say, the kids are gone to school. If anyone should leave, it should be her. She's sober and causing the faking fight. Maybe you should arrest her for false reporting of a crime, which is me enjoying some beers inside my house. The cops huddled, the white shirt directed them out, and all was well. The ex, bewildered, says you're faking nuts, you know that? I said yeah, remember that next time you want to involve armed assholes into my house, it might not go so well. Now that's a nice bagaz. The only time in my life I have ever actually uttered aloud a set of words that was both sexist and could be considered demeaning to another person. Normally I'm very conscientious about what I say and who I say it to. I moved into line at the deli counter. In front of me was a woman with the most glorious once in a lifetime, to me, as I had ever seen, and the part of my brain that determines proper mouth movement just failed. So I said, now that's a nice bagaz. She turned around and looked at me and probably saw the horrified look on my face and smiled. I was so taken aback, I apologized, stammered, tried to tell her I shouldn't have said it, meant a fantastic wonderful jaw-dropping as and just made a complete fool out of myself. It was right out of a comedy skit. She ended up being a great person, accepted that this was a one-time I can't believe that slipped out moment, and I see her fairly often at the supermarket. We are both married, so no funny business. She confided in me once that her husband doesn't like her bagaz, and she was very pleased to get the compliment, although me not looking like an obvious perv helped. It could have gone really bad though. My first job, at 14, was as a cashier for a food place at a seasonal event. I had always enjoyed the event as a gother, so I tried really hard to do my job well. My boss was a really cranky woman who hired a cook that took 20-minute smoke breaks every hour. His girlfriend, same issue, another 14-year-old, and her good friend who was consistently drunk on shift. So all of this resulted in me and the other 14-year-old picking up as much slack as we could. Not legally allowed to work the fryers, but it meant huge lines, and for drunk people waiting for fried food, that sheet turns ugly fast. I like to consider myself an easygoing person, but the few times I've been pushed to my limit the witnesses have told me it was a little terrifying. So one day, overwhelmed and exhausted, I yell to my boss for help, and she ambles out of the back and is like, if you can't do the job I'll have to find someone who can, and I rounded on her like a friggin' cobra and pretty much shouted, maybe, if your drunk ass friend wasn't passed out in our goddamned freezer I would be able to do my job. In front of the entire line and the other workers. I thought she was going to punch me in the face. Legitimately thought I would get knocked on my ass wearing a stupid outfit, working for minimum wage, at my first ever job. Thankfully the event owners knew there were issues, and didn't really punish me. This happened less than 8 hours ago actually. I work in the petroleum field, where I have to board different vessels for inspection at the docks. Boarded a barge earlier, and forgot my ID in the truck. After doing my inspection I went to the tugboat to sign in, and the captain was giving me attitude about not having my ID. Told him I could run up to the truck to get it right quick, and on my way out he said, now get the fuck out to here. Now normally I'd let something like that go, but tonight happened to be a particularly frustrating evening. So, I went back to my truck and came back to give him the ID he needed, and I was not polite about it at all. Ended up in a cussing match with the guy, and I threatened to throw him into the channel, stormed off and promptly told him to go fuck himself. Not 5 minutes later I realized I probably should have said that, and of course about 10 minutes after that I got a phone call from my boss telling me I'm banned from ever working that particular tug, maybe the entire fleet, and possibly the terminal I work at. So now I've got to be at the office at 0900 to meet with the big boss and hash this all out when I could be home drinking a whiskey and crashing out in my comfortable bed. Shouldn't have said that. I should not have said that. Edit, TLDR, threatened a captain, banned from tugboat, meeting with bosses to discuss further employment. This ended up lengthier than expected. Oh well. A little over 2 years ago I was meeting up at a sports bar with some friends for one of the first games of the football season. I don't really give a hoot about football, but my friends, including 2 roommates at the time, do, so I figured I'd join for the festivities/beer. About 30 minutes go by that I'm there, and my best friend in the group, we'll call him James Thames, hasn't shown yet, which is odd, because he's usually pretty timely. I text a few times, give him a call, and nothing for a while, until I get a text that says I don't think I'm going to be able to make it. I ask what's up, and get no response, so I continue with my pint when maybe 10 minutes later I get a call from his sister, another close friend we'll call Jenny, in tears asking me to come over to their mom's place. I close out my tab and head over there, no questions asked. Once I arrive, I see their stepdad sitting on the front steps looking very upset. As I walk to the door, he takes my hand very firmly and tells me Dad Thames died in a car accident earlier this evening. I can't even speak. I run upstairs to find Jenny, who is just bawling her eyes out. I stay a couple hours before leaving to go see James at his place, before sending a message out to my roommates and another couple friends in our roommates thread on Facebook Messenger saying Dad Thames died earlier tonight in a car accident, completely thoughtlessly as a heads up. As soon as I hit send I remember that James Thames is in that thread, and he is the first person to see the message. I died a little bit on the inside. I'm sure he didn't need the reminder of what had just happened, and I felt like such an asshole after that, but thankfully when I got to his place he was just happy to have support around. I worked in a medical clinic that had a very old roof. It had like really coarse aggregate painted with a white sealant of some kind. Needless to say, it was hell on your knees if you had to go up and work on something which required kneeling or crawling for an extended amount of time. The roof had some small leaks we spotted during California's very short rainy season, and I was taking a small bucket of roofing tar up there to do some patchwork. So I grabbed these nice beefy knee pads with comfort gel inside, started them on over my work pants and headed up from the basement. While I was walking through the orthopedic depot, one of the cool nurse's assistants I was friends with asked, "Where are you going?" while looking at me knee pads. Without thinking I replied, "Heading into ours to ask for a raise." She laughed, as did the orthopedic physician who happened to be listening in. After the words left my mouth I had this feeling of chagrin. That joke could be very well be taken as inappropriate, and I could have gotten in big trouble. Especially considering the employee base was 95% female. Luckily everyone that heard the joke was cool, and they chuckled realizing I was kidding. The physician was a very non-PC type doctor, and he lost his sheet. I told the ER manager later, and she laughed at my chagrin, but wasn't very concerned with my behavior, since I was model employee and definitely the most agreeable and well-liked maintenance man there. This haunts me still. This happened when I was babysitting for a family who has 2 foster children, and 2 of their own, whom I babysat before the family took in the foster kids. Prior to the foster kids, the mum was chatting with me about how she was planning on fostering blah blah blah. She mentioned she ideally would like to foster a child of around the age of 5 as they are "less damaged." She ended up fostering 2 children of the ages 14 and 15. Fast forward to about 2 weeks ago. She had just come home, so I went to put my shoes on by the door, where she normally sees me out. All kids were in the front room, which is near the front door. We stand at the door chatting, where I mention that my boyfriend's mum is considering fostering a child. The mum says "Do I can help her out with references and whatnot." We was talking more about it when I finally say "Yeah, you've got to be a really special kind of person to look after damaged goods." I thought I was complimenting her on how kind and selfless she is for fostering, but she hushes me quickly and points to the front room where the foster kids are. I really hope they didn't hear me say that or were listening on our conversation. This keeps me up at night, but I do think highly of the kids. They're amazing considering what they've been through. So, my good friend from university, who I have known this many 20+ years. She was in my very small class of 30 graduating students, and was always there smiling and laughing right along with me, while some of the others were either too uptight or unfriendly. We kept in contact as friends, marriages, kids, and all that other stuff, and as creatures of habit, my greeting to her has always been, "Hey, Em. How's life with you today?" 20 years of that on the phone, in library, in class, at a party, going out for dinner, and bumping into her in the parking lot. Well, her mother died a few years back, and I went to the funeral service. It was sad, because her mom was pretty cool, and I could tell that is where she got her own character. It was a small gathering, and I had heard from friends about how her mother met her demise, cancer. I see her in the front greeting people paying their respects, and guess what I said to her without thinking? Hey, how's life with you today? Yep. I realized it only after I had said it. Her sister is standing right next to her. Her cousin, who I don't know, is right there close by, and FML. Her reply was, seriously Riff, kind of screwing up her face and squinting her eyes. She shook her head, chuckled, and gave me a hug. I whispered, oops, I'm sorry. Force of habit. And she hugged me tighter and longer. Back in high school senior year, I was chatting up this one girl. Right after our fall exams, some students we are sticking around. Exams ended at like 1. So me and her are talking, and she's pretty sassy, which works for me, because I have a tendency to be extremely sassy as well. We went to a Catholic high school, so we had to take exams in religion. Ironically, this made me less religious. So we are talking, and the subject of religion gets brought up. She Jewish, I'm Catholic, technically. Anyway, I remember she said something like Catholics are such idiots something Jesus. I don't remember exactly what she said, but I remember that I thought cheating on her people would be valid banter. It was not. I cringe when I remember saying Hitler should have finished you off. I thought it would be funny given the context, but there's never a right context for that. I remember the look of shock and anger on her face when I said that. I tried to backpedal, but she just walked away. We never spoke again. Some friends/strangers came up to me asking about what I said. Once I gave them my story, they would either back me up or just laugh and say an idiot. So, yeah, I could have gone worse, but I still think it could have gone better. I'm not proud. I was a teenager. A military douchebag latched onto our group one night. We were living in China, and so our mutual friend's poor English ability gave him a poor filter for terrible individuals. We eventually guessed. But anyway, the key factors are that he had a necklace with the word will emblazoned on it around his neck, and that he was a huge butthead. After initially saying hi, after bumping into our mutual friend, he latched onto us as a whole. He proceeded throughout that night to tell us why the US was justified to exist, because the European invaders civilized the native population, while exterminating those uncivilized portions of the native population. Needless to say, we didn't really take to him very fast. But towards the end of the night, when people had started to turn on him, and jokes were being made at his expense, and I was trying to make peace against several of these jokes being aimed at him, I said to him, well, maybe it would be best not to have another dude's name around your neck, seems kinda romantic. He turned to me and said, you better be faking joke, that's my dead best friend. I in my panic, assumed he was trying to fuck me, and so dug myself further. Well, he's probably sat up in heaven thinking back EWW, bit gay, mate. Dude almost beat the shit out of me, and I retreated beyond red in the face, and I learned, since that I was way out line. But he did ditch us when a friend of all of us passed out, calling us despicable, forcing us to carry her 2 blocks OMS plus LEGS to the closest apartment, to get her somewhere to sleep. Wished he'd have lended us some military missile to carrying dead weight, so his friend could be SFE, rather than just using it to harass and intimidate us, but I personally probably deserved it. This incident goes down as the year I ruined Christmas. Also as the moment I was banned from drinking Fireball for life. It was Christmas Eve and the entire family, except my nephew who was on his first of several stays in the local penitentiary, was there cooking, eating and generally making merry. The mother of my niece brought jello shots. This is not a regular item on the holiday menu, but hey, why not? I take one, then another, perhaps even a third. They were good. They were also made with Fireball, which I was unaware of, and would have declined had I known. Fireball and I do not get along. The phone rings, and it's the jailbird. Everyone takes their turn talking to him, and without warning the phone is thrust into my hands. Say hi to your nephew. Without thinking, I shout into the phone, hey Tony, have you been butt faked yet? The kitchen and surrounding rooms go dead silent. His dad, my brother, rips the phone from my hand and runs off to another room. I look up from the shrimp I was preparing and see my entire family staring at me in shock. Nobody says anything. I went back to cleaning the shrimp and I can hear the whispers starting all around me. Christmas was definitely different that year as everyone eyed Aunt Debbie with suspicion and perhaps even a little fear. I never got an answer to my question either. I was on acid in my friend's house listening to music. It was just coming on, and we smoked a fat joint making the acid jump gears. It felt good, but I was a little nervous, because I couldn't really control my thoughts. My friend lives in a big house with a lot of others, and his mom's friend's nephew comes home at like 1 to 2 am. Right when the acid's peaking, someone rattles the door lock. I get really paranoid that the cops are coming, or his mom's home or some nonsense, but this guy walks in and asks us what we are doing. My friend says we dropped acid. This guy recommended we listen to Pink Floyd. A great idea I thought, but no one else seemed to like the music besides me. It gets a little awkward cause I could tell no one else really liked it. Can't blame them for liking rap. Right before he turns to leave he cocks his head to the left, and he has a giant faking nose. I've seen some big noses, but this guy had the fattest Roman nose that stuck out. I know the acid probably affected what I was focusing on, but I looked at it. Then I looked at my friends. Their eyes were all fixed on his nose and I looked back at his nose. He looked a little self-conscious. I feel bad thinking about all the teasing I may have reminded him of. Looked at him square in the face, and in the most cocky, smarmy, asshole-like tone imaginable. I said nice nose. He looked at me, and his face turned red. He said what? I felt as though I could see the hot blood rushing through his face. His eyes seemed to change, and his teeth got sharper, like spikes somehow. In my mind for a second I realize my error. I try to apologize and offer an explanation. For some reason a phrase from a documentary came to mind. I'm sorry, but I didn't mean to say that. I'm on acid and the human eye is drawn to protruding objects while thinking that all I could say is protruding objects. He looked like he wanted to hit me, which I understand. Years ago, I was playing Black Ops 1 with a friend. We weren't super close, but we talked frequently and knew a decent amount about each other. The year prior, his mother had passed away suddenly and it hit him hard. He had been on a massive year-long bender of alcohol and any drug he could get his hands on. It was really sad to watch, but he had slowly began to come out of it and slow down on his usage. One of my weird humor quirks is that I'll take something someone says and repeat it back to them in the form I/you/or insert person here does that. It's genuinely not even funny most of the time, but it makes me and the people who know me laugh because it's more weird than anything else. An example, a classmate says to me I really faked up on that exam. I'll give it back to them as your brother really faked up on that exam. I've done it for so long, I do it without even thinking most of the time. On this fateful day, we were just playing the game, hanging out, and joking around. We were having a bad match, and he yells out "Fuck, I died again." Me, being the complete dumb as that I am, without even thinking, says "Your mom died again." I heard my own voice trail off as I said it. I had shocked myself. My mouth was open, and I couldn't get out more words. I felt like the biggest piece of shit in the world and I wanted nothing more than to melt into a puddle on the ground. After about 5 seconds of silence that felt like an infinite amount of eternities, he let out the most half-hearted "Heh." I apologized profusely, and he knew that I just said shit like that all the time, because he knew me. He was ultimately fine, but the friendship just naturally split over time. I still think about that every so often, and want to self-assassinate. So, I was on a second date with this amazing girl and things were going great. We went and got burritos at a cool burrito place and just talked. Soon, she started to open up about her past relationships and how they were pretty awful. She'd been sexually harassed and verbally abused, and while it was a lot to take in, especially for a second date, I appreciated how open she was. I let her know then and there that I would always treat her with respect and ask for consent, and that I'd never do any of the things that they did to her. That made her smile. "Wanna go smoke?" she asked. I smiled back and said sure. Then we left the cool burrito place and got high off a few blunts together in my car. I hadn't smoked for a while, but she was a bona fide stoner, so I was way more out of it than she was, but we were still having a good time. Now it was getting late, so I decided to take her back to her place. I turned on my car radio as we started driving. The radio station was supposed to be chill oldies, not straight up reggae, so I was a bit surprised when Bob Marley's Three Little Birds started playing. I looked over to my date and probably had the dumbest grin on my face. Right at the apex of the song, we finally made it back to her place. I put the car in park and kept the radio going. Then I reached for the reclining buttons on the side of my seat, and as I began to recline, I slowly and innocently said, "Man, isn't this just the type of song that makes you wanna recline and relax?" Obviously I was still high out of my mind, but the moment I looked over at her face, I sobered up real quick. With one of the scariest death stares I've ever seen, she said, "Oh haha, I see what you're trying to get me to do. You want a blue job, is that it?" Oh seat, no. Long story short, she got out of the car and there was no third date. My grandparents had made their basement into a little apartment for my mom and I to live in. She was a teenager when she had me, and when my mom met my stepdad, when I was 5, we moved out. Over the years my grandparents rented the apartment out to family or friends. Fast forward to about 12 years ago, when I was in my early 20s. My grandmother, who I was very close to, was sick with ALS, and I decided to move back into my childhood apartment to be close to her. My cousin had been living in the apt previously and had painted the bathroom a burnt orange color to match the hideous bathroom curtain, or vice versa. Due to my grandmother's illness, she hadn't been able to get down into the apartment for a while, so when I was moving and she asked me how it looked down there, I told her it was fine, but that Carly, my cousin slash her granddaughter, had painted the bathroom an ugly color and there was this awful curtain in there, and described it to her. To which my grandmother responds, "To the best of her ability, I made that curtain." I about died. I felt like such an absolute jerk. She died not long afterwards. I kept that curtain folded in a drawer for years and years and just very recently brought myself to throw it out. I could cry thinking about it. Damn it. I'm crying. The curtain really was ugly though. Edit. Autocorrect. I used to work in a shitty place about 8 odd years back, and I had a manager who was shitty and all, although he was nice to me before he became my debt manager. He's dating my housemate at the time, so he stays over at our place a lot and used to be friendly with me at home, but at work he was like a shitty lion. Then something bad happened at work which made him hospitalized. Well, there was a robbery and his body was grazed by a bullet, which was a horrible thing because another colleague was killed because of the robbers. Anyways, my colleague and I raised our hands and whooped when we realized he wasn't going to be coming to work and yell at us because he's been giving us shit for a while now. Obviously I was not thinking of him being sick, I was just thinking of being free of his dictatorship. Unfortunately, that action was seen wrongly by another manager, who told his girlfriend, who became super angry at me and complained to my sister, who told my mom, and my mom was so disappointed in me, saying that she didn't raise me to be like this. I realized then how it might have seemed to them. I'm not insensitive, I was just cheering for having a peace of mind at work, not because a dude was injured. I had to talk to the girl and apologize and explain that the reason I cheered was because he wasn't coming to work, not because of his injury. She accepted it, but I know she doesn't like me much since that day. Well, her boyfriend was an ass. I was waiting in line at my favorite nightclub with a friend. A bit drunk already. We were looking at the smokers area nearby, which had a bunch of people sitting around looking a bit bedraggled and tired, being the late hour it was. I think the local meme page of the day often joked about how trashy it usually looked and the type of characters lurking there. It even had the nickname of Refugee Camp, possibly because when it was wet and cold everyone would huddle under an overhanging awning. Now a small piece of background info. In this town there was at the time quite an influx of refugees from places like South Sudan, because there was some kind of immigration center and extra government housing assistance there. Anyway, I said to my friend quite loudly, "They're right, the smokers area does look like a refugee camp." I heard a girl's voice near me. "Sorry, it looks like what?" I turned my head slowly to see a girl with an extremely dark complexion giving me an "oh no you didn't look." I could have just said "oh nothing" and shut up, but do you think I did? Me, well, that's what they call it, who calls it that? Me, stammering about some meme page on Facebook. I had to attend a safeguarding and protecting children course as mandatory CPD. I'm a sports coach, so have to have checks, etc. It's basically a group lecture that is utterly ridiculous and completely blurs the line between common sense and best practice. Anyway, we get to the exercise, where the lady reads a scenario, and we rank it from 1 to 10 in terms of risk, 1 being no risk at all, and 10 being risky. The first scenario was, an adult female rugby coach leads a session alone for the senior men's team. General mutter that it's not risky at all. My colleague, who I don't like much, and is not the best practitioner, pops out with, wait a minute, that's not that good, I think we should discuss this. The lady leading the session says, great, some disagreement. This is where we will get into the meat of the discussion and discover things. Now, what's the worst eventuality in this scenario? Without missing a beat, I smash out, gang rap. I knew immediately I should have done what I normally do and just say it in my head. My boss is staring at me in disbelief. There's a huge intake of breath across the room and silence. The lady stammers. I decide to explain myself. Well, if they murder her, she's dead. If they gang rap her, she's gotta live with that. Still more silence. I took a moment to remind everyone that we thought it's a perfectly reasonable scenario as more adults are normal human beings, and it was the fuckwit next to me whose dirty imagination had thought anything bad might happen in said scenario. I'm going to continue only saying my horrible jokes in my head from now on. This is basically my life in essence, which is why I have self-diagnosed very mild selective mutism. I have a knack of saying the wrong things at the wrong time. One of our friends, I'll call him Bob, was basically Quagmire from Family Guy, a perv who'd find a tree attractive if he stared at it long enough. So one of our other friends, I'll call him Steve, jokingly asked, I wonder if he'd wanna fuck Jim, our other friend's younger sister. The joke was that Bob's younger brother was the same age as Jim's younger sister. I retorted, no way man. Bob told me once that he thinks Jim's younger sister is ugly as fuck. And guess who I said that in front of? Jim. Luckily, everyone zoned me out and were on their phones. Another incident. Our friend Alex had recently came out, and I was a typical stupid 14-year-old who thought homophobic jokes were cool. One time, we were in the car listening to my favorite artist. One of our other friends teases me by saying, God, this guy sucks. His music is horrible. I smirked and said to him, anyone who doesn't like his music is gay. And yes, Alex was in the passenger seat when I said that. But just like the above incident, everyone zoned me out, ignored me as they were on their phones. One last incident. Right after my friend told me that his friend tried touching his girlfriend by saying that his hands were dirty and he wants to wipe them on her shirt, I said to him, what the fuck? Hell no. Do it back to his girl. See how he likes it. The fuck. I just won't do the ellipsis suspense thing anymore. Yes, I said that in front of his girlfriend, who immediately, and obviously extremely reasonably, advised him not to do that, to which he, again very reasonably, agreed to. They were both chill enough to not bash on me for proposing such a stupid idea. Yep. My life is one big pot of cringy moments caused by me saying wrong things at the wrong time. My ex and her mom didn't have a great relationship. Her mom often accused her of being too loose with men, and that she would end up pregnant, etc. And her mom in general said some pretty horrible things about her daughter. During my relationship with her, there had been several times she would cry about it. Towards the end of the relationship, I got a vibe that she was seeing other guys, or at least was a little too friendly with them for my taste. We broke up, but tried the friend thing for a little bit. Didn't work out. She slept with one of the guys I had found her too friendly with, and I was a bit annoyed by the whole situation, and said something about it like, oh, I thought you were just friends during a call. It struck a nerve, and an argument followed that ended with her saying that it's all in my head, and that I'm the only one who thinks she's a slut. I said, well, not just me. Your mom thinks so too. It went quiet on the other side of the phone, and a few seconds after she hung up, we have never spoken again. The last thing I ever said to this girl was that her mother didn't like her. I regretted it instantly. Even if she had cheated on me, I still don't think she deserved me saying that. I wrote her an email the following day apologizing, and that I didn't expect a reply or anything, just that I wanted her to know I was sorry for what I had said. A few years later she ran into some of my friends at a party and slept with one of them. The others said they felt it was a revenge kind of thing. I'm not sure. I really hope not. If anything, it makes me feel even worse. That one sentence hurt her so much that she still cared years later. She was a great girl. 19-year-old me was just dumb for saying shit like that. Outside of that, I once said to a friend that I hoped he would die of cancer, and I assured him that I was fully aware that his dad had died of cancer only a few years before, which had left a pretty big hole in their entire family. Both these two situations weigh on my mind still a little, especially the one with my friend. It was a fucking horrible thing to say, which I've never apologized for, but I really would like to. Maybe someday. We haven't been in contact for like 8 years. I was at the car wash with my buddy a few years ago. While waiting for the car to be finished up, we decided to have a cigarette. I don't smoke anymore, but when I did I was very polite. I would hide it in my hand from passing school buses, walk across the street from people, things like that. Especially sensitive to babies and pregnant women, of course. So two women come out visibly pregnant. They sit down in those plastic chairs and were also waiting for their cars to be finished. I promptly tap my buddy to get up and we start to walk away. I can tell the gesture is appreciated, and I felt good that she realized what I did. The fuck up. I walk back after a few minutes post cigarette, and one woman left. The other one smiled at me and I smiled back. In my mind I thought that was a thank you smile, not just a regular smile. I'm an outgoing person, so I decide to pipe up and reap some more real life karma acknowledgement. I start to say, we moved over there, since the both of you. That's when I first realized my grave mistake. In a split second I saw her eyes start to widen. I knew at that point she was indeed not pregnant, she was just fat. Here I'm trying to be nice to people, and I still just called a fat girl pregnant when she wasn't pregnant. There have been suicides for less. What a tremendous asshole. So this all happened in microseconds. I can feel my buddy realize what happened, and his shock and dismay at my words as well. Literally microseconds I finish the sentence and say we moved over there, since the both of you have such nice pocketbooks, with a smile, but the damage was already done. She didn't buy it. I try to play it off smooth and make an emergency exit to leave the car wash and this faking planet if possible. Out of the corner of my eye, while starting to walk away, I see her pick up her pocketbook and cover up her big belly. TLDR, tried to be nice, was not nice. I'm truly sorry, car wash girl. Back in high school, my English teacher had one of those student teachers trying to do training in class with us. The normal teacher likes it because he would just leave the class and let the assistant teacher take over for unspecified lengths of time. This happened pretty regularly, which is how my slip up happened. The assistant teacher started a game with everyone where he would put up a word on the board and groups of students had to think of unique synonyms for the word and he would decide who wins. Totally subjective. One of the words he writes up is annoying. To which I immediately blurt out our regular teacher's name thinking it would be hilarious. And it was. Until I realized a second later he was actually sitting at his desk not more than 10 feet away from me. His response was, "You know I'm right here," with such a sad and lonely tone that I felt nothing but extremely apologetic. I had no words to say other than "I'm sorry, I was just messing around," and then continued to sit in my seat in silence and shame. I realized that calling your teacher annoying isn't necessarily a big deal, but it was the way he responded and sounded that really got me and made me completely regret what I said. My 3 younger brothers are fostered to be adopted when they come of age. They have never ever been anything but my brothers to me since they were born. I've never treated them different as they have always been here. I truly love them all very much, more than they know. The oldest was going through a really faking annoying phase when he was a young adolescent. I think about this time, it was years ago. Completely changed his attitude towards us. Rude as fuck to my mother, causing arguments and drama every single day, and causing upset to my mother, which, in turn, really pissed me off. One day he was being extra as whole Y, and generally being a dick. He said something to upset me. So me, also being a dick, I was 18ish and not fully cooked myself, said, "Yeah, well, at least I know who my father is." I mean, the moment I said it, I burst into tears and ran to my mother to tell her what a disgusting thing I just said. I bawled my eyes out and apologized over and over to him. He forgave me. My other brother called me a faking beach. I was. My ex-boss was talking to one of the owners of our company. This was a fairly huge corporation. This man was honestly inspirational. He was super nice, and so was my boss. When he phoned you, you could hear his smile. All part of the point, trust me. Owner, we'll call Ron. Boss, we'll call Brent. Ron was from a war-torn country. I was always too embarrassed to ask where, because as a child his home was blown up, and he is now an amputee. He lost his right arm all the way up past his elbow, and his right leg below the knee. I'm getting to the point, trust me. Brent had a meeting with Ron concerning Ron's retirement. To celebrate, his kids had bought him a really fancy watch. They walk out of their meeting and to my desk to give me the dates and times for their next meeting, and Brent tells me, "Look how fancy Ron looks with his new watch." I compliment said watch and I go, "Wow Ron, this is what you get for investing in expensive education." Rich kids, it was common for us all to joke around. We were all friendly. Ron goes, "Thanks. I'm sure it cost an arm and a leg," and I laughed. To my horror, neither one of them was laughing. I still think about it to this day. A bit late but probably worth to share. Not something I had said but a friend of mine did. So there are these big toy shops called Jumbo where I live, and we went with some friends of mine. Let's call them M and F. So there we are, and you know how cool young teenagers like us like to mess around with all the toys. They're like rubber swords and stuff like that. So we get to a section where there are masks and carnival things, and there are these funny glasses with lizard eyes. And M has a very clever idea. He put the glasses on and turned to R and said, "Your mother has died." And oh, I should have noted that R's mom really had died like 2 months ago, and she was still traumatized. So there we all stand in awkwardness. M still doesn't get it and stays with this huge smile waiting for everyone to prove his funniest joke and laugh. 3 seconds later R says, "Right on point M," with the biggest sarcasm I've ever seen, and just turns and goes to look at other stuff. So apparently M had some really good laughs with that joke at school with his classmates, and he just wanted to share it with us. I'm almost sure it didn't work out as planned. Excuse my English, it is not my first language. One of the grocery stores in California does this thing every year where you collect stamps based on how much spent, and at the end of the even you can turn in your stamps for pots and pans. I was buying groceries after work one night, and the guy at the register asked if I wanted my stamps. My response was, "Yeah, sure." The woman behind me, who was pretty good looking, asked if she could have them. The following line of logic went off in my head: pots and pans make food. Dinner is a food. These pots and pans can be used to make dinner. She eats dinner and I eat dinner. If we eat dinner together, it'll be a date. Date equals sex. We haven't had that in a long time. Did you follow that? Okay, good. Here's what came out of my mouth: "If you make me dinner in these pots and pans, you can have them." Even the woman ringing up groceries in the next lane leaned over to ask me what I said. It was awkward. Later on, I told a buddy this story. He had a good laugh and said, "It's a shame you didn't invite her over to vacuum your house too." I'm late, but I once uncontrollably cursed over 20 times in front of a Christian audience. Despite being the most awkward individual you could meet, I played the leading role in a dramatic love tragedy. One of the last performances took place in a very intimate weird theater that I was very uncomfortable with. The people on the front row were sitting at the same level, just half a meter from the end of the stage, where I had to be a lot dramatically monologuing. It is good to know that I was allowed to freestyle a little bit because it suited my dramatic role, since I'm flamboyant and loud. The girl I was performing with was nice, but a bit hot. She did not really get people, and was as a result a little difficult to work with. We had just finished the first part of the play and there was a little break. I was really glad we were halfway done, and had distanced myself a little, but from the rest, to recover from the awkward setting. This girl went off at me for having said a curse word that was derived from the name Jesus. I said something like OG in Dutch, and that I was disrespectful, and that I should not curse. And I said sure and apologized, but she said I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation, and started ranting about how I had personally offended everyone. The entire dressing room went silent, and I went beet red. After she was done we directly had to go on stage. I focused so hard on not cursing that I cursed without a break. My monologue was a disaster. I blurted out Jesus Christ, holy shit and holy Jesus, and even some variations of God damn it, and every time I said it, the girl, who had to embrace me a lot, pinched me and stared at me intensely, which made me more nervous. Every single time the word Jesus escaped my mouth I went through all of the circles of Dance Inferno in my mind. Instead of kissing her at the end, I asked if I could tightly embrace her, because I could not look at her face good times. A rough childhood, some issues with depression, and being a correctional officer for 4 years, I developed a really delayed emotional response to things as a way of coping. I'm the guy who, when my girlfriend told me about an acquaintance who popped a lot of pills who died from odding on Xanax, told her that was really stressful, and asked her where I could get some Xanax. At a medium security unit I worked at, we had this stolen valor guy named Yeoman. Well, Yeoman never showed up for work, because he was always too tired from dealing with drill practice, or with exercises, or whatever in his reserve unit. But the thing was, nobody even knew what branch of the service he was in, because it changed for everyone. He told Marines that he was in the Marines. He told Navy that he was Navy. I saw through his bullshit pretty early, and two of the things I hate most in this world are dirty cops and derelict soldiers, but stolen valor is probably in the number 3 spot. Anyway, we were at shift turnout, and you know shit's weird, because the warden was there. She starts telling us how earlier that day Yeoman was found dead, having killed himself. When all of the robots started parroting he had his problems, but he was a good guy. Has anyone contacted his unit? Blah blah blah. Someone said he was a Marine, like they were proud of him or something, and someone else said he told them he was Navy. It was amusing to watch the life fall to pieces as everyone finally figured out that not even his fiancée knew what he was supposed to be. They passed out shift paperwork after telling us that counseling was available and all that, and in that paperwork I got a move slip for a rather annoying offender that I was tired of dealing with, and another one right behind that, and I said hell yes. Finally getting rid of offender and offender, and the guy next to me, a bit of a friend of Yeoman, said, rather broken up, yeah, it's like faking Christmas, isn't it? Normally I don't care at all about what I say. I stand by it. But I'd entirely compartmentalized the announcement to the point I didn't even remember it was something we'd been told. It's one of the few things I regret saying, just because of the people who I hurt with it. Now, later that night, when asked to go to dinner with the other co's, I told them I wasn't going to go to dinner to talk about Yeoman. I didn't like him, and that doesn't change, just because he is dead now. They said it was not about that, it was just to hang out. I gave another co a ride to the diner, and when the subject of Yeoman came up I delivered line of my all-time hits, this isn't anything new. Yeoman never showed up for work anyway. As far as I'm concerned, this is just him no call no showing to the rest of his life. This was said among people who have the same necessary warped sense of humor I have, and it actually got a lot of laughs. I might catch some heat for what seems like some pretty heartless reactions, but you've absolutely got to be able to put off those emotions until later in my line of work. You have to be able to suspend the 5 steps of grief and deal with them when you're on your own or in a safe place. Anyone who has worked high stress or dangerous jobs can tell you that, but I understand that it can look utterly horrible to the average person. I'm a person that doesn't regret much, but I regret that time not giving other people the time they needed to push the off switch before getting back to business. There were multiple times in high school where a teacher would say something and I'd instantly have a sarcastic remark. I wasn't a bad kid, in fact I was quite the opposite, but sometimes my mouth speaks faster than I can think. Wow, that's a really bad idea to say out loud. Let's not. Anyway, there were multiple times I had to play stupid to get out of things. One time I had study hall with a teacher. This guy was fairly new, so I'd never had a class with him. He was pretty okay from what I could tell. I remember one day he was talking to another student, and he said it was really disrespectful to him when students knew teachers by their first name. So immediately I blurted out. Luckily, I didn't get in trouble. But I did debate skipping study hall for the rest of the year. I don't even know why I said it. My thought process was something along the lines of "oh please dude, it's just a name. None of the other teachers give a shit. Wait. Maybe he has a really embarrassing first name. What is it? Oh Trevor." Which I easily cold played off by the way. But I just sat there silently. My brothers don't tell me things. We were driving back home after an AC/DC concert and stopped by one of their friends' houses on the way back. We get there, and the only person in there is this nice woman, pretty enough, but in hindsight definitely looked really tired. We are invited in, and the house to look pretty normal, a little bare, but still furnished. So we're there for maybe a half hour. Everyone's just chatting, the woman is accommodating, and nothing has gone wrong just yet. Then a man starts climbing the stairs, and he spots all of these strangers in his living room, and I can see just faint traces of distress in his tired eyes. He asks the woman, "Who are these people?" Worried. And me, being the joker that I am, open up my mouth for the first time that night and say, "Don't worry, we are just here to rob you." All at once people start yelling at me, my brothers are hitting me, telling me to shut up, and I can see panic consume the man's face. The woman immediately starts telling him it was just a joke, which it was, and that there's nothing to worry about. Eventually the guy goes right back downstairs, and my brothers start chastising me for saying that. I mean, yeah, it wasn't the best joke, but was it really necessary to hit me like that? Turns out it was. See, what my brothers neglected to tell me was that we were in a goddamn crack house, and that some of the residents were probably super high at the time. I don't know what they were thinking, bringing their 16-year-old brother into a crack house, but yeah, suffice it to say I kept my mouth shut for the rest of the night. It's probably too late, but I'm gonna share this anyway because it's amazing. I work part in a convenience store that's like if Whole Foods was a convenience store. There was a major music festival happening in the park 4 blocks from my store when this happened. Let me preface the story by telling you all this. It's been an issue in our stores, having cashiers accept bloody money, like money with blood on it. Mostly from the homeless around here, but it's been enough of an issue that there had to be an announcement made saying, "Hey, no more money with blood on it." Anyway, it's the last day of the music festival, and our store is swamped. I'm running the register, just mindlessly scanning items and giving change. A girl comes up, I scan her item, and she goes to hand me her money. It was in the tiny little lighter pocket of her shorts, all wadded up. She jokingly said, "Sorry, this is probably the worst money you'll get all day. Will you still accept it?" Me being on autopilot replied, "As long as there's not blood on it, I'll take it." I go to give her change back, and notice what it was she was buying. Tampons. Goddamn tampons. I stammered for a secretary, then just shook my head and gave up. She had no way of knowing that was an actual issue in our store, and now there's some chick out there who thinks I'm a misogynist piece of shit. At boarding school, during evening studies, asked once to the guy watching us, "Is it true that other female watcher gets rammed by college students?" Like, we were 16, I wanted to make my friends laugh. Said female that watched us was kinda hot, and there was this stupid teen rumor that she was banging with the dudes on the other side of our building, who were first year college students. Not in the U.S, I'm translating. The guy watching us was very cool, and kind of a big bro to us. So he gave me a chance and replied, "What? Sorry, I didn't hear." I repeated the question in the now perfectly silent room with all my friends watching me like, is he really saying that? He's nuts. Was already in a bit of trouble before that. It raised a massive shitstorm for me. Ended up bargaining to be put in detention every Wednesday afternoon for 4 hours instead of being expelled. I had like 5 months left of school. It sucked because at boarding school, the only free moment of the week was the Wednesday afternoon. I was pretty stupid that time and I kinda knew I shouldn't repeat the words, but I did anyway, because le funny teenager. A friend's mom passed away in 7th grade. Really tough time for anyone, never mind losing your mother. This was also a lot of our first brushes with helping a grieving friend. We were all walking on eggshells. We are sitting in wood shop, finishing up some project, and my friend whose mom passed makes an obvious adolescent joke and says, "Pass me that screwdriver. I need to screw this wood." Another friend, without thinking, says, "Your mom needs to screw this wood." Again, a super typical joke for our age and time. But the whole room goes silent and just stares at my friend. He takes a deep breath, chuckles a bit, and says, "I knew it would happen eventually. That was a good one, man." For about 3 seconds it was total, "Why the fuck would you say that?" But then 12-year-old friend had probably the most mature reaction you could. It lifted this blanket we'd all been working under, to walk on eggshells, and reminded us that our friend was still the same kid he was. I don't remember a lot of things vividly from my childhood, but I will always remember learning that laughter, familiarity, and just being normal old friends with somebody can help mend a hole in their heart. Once when I was a kid I confided in my future mother-in-law that my dad had cheated on my mom while I was a kid. He had died less than a year before, and my mom was literally falling apart. I basically lost both my parents, and one night I screamed just that at my mother, one particularly abusive night. I did regret that. Anyway, I was 17, newly orphaned, watching some talk TV show about spouses and infidelity. I said one of the women on the show was disgusting the way she talked about bringing her big husband to his knees to cry when she told him she had been screwing some dude behind a baseball park for months. I don't know how it came up, but she said something very cruel about my dad and my dad cheating on my mom. I turned to her and said, "What do you think your husband is doing when he is traveling around the country every week?" She didn't say anything, but I know her face well now, and that hurt her. I don't even remember what she said. That hurt so much. I just remember how angry I was and how I felt so bad about it afterwards. If she ever remembered it, I would say sorry, but she will never ever apologize to me for any of the messed up shit she has said. Then again, even when I cared for her dying husband in the hospital in the last month of his life, and even though he said I was a good one and nobody give me any shit when he was gone, she still doesn't love me. I miss reading to him, but I don't miss him being scared. That last month was torture. He lost everything, and he simply gave up. I hope you are happy for smoking cigs his whole life when she hated it. I hope you are happy what you've done to your family for these cigarettes. You did this to us. I told you so. She said some seriously ugly things to him while he was in that hospital bed dying. I'm sure she said nice things too. I know she was grieving and angry and so many other things, but I honestly feel like she crushed his spirit, and I think he was just tired and gave up. Ugh, everyone I know is so faked up. I work a truck stop, and a few weeks ago, some of our local customers came charging up to the desk. A trans woman was in the woman's restroom and they were claiming that she was standing up, peeing where everyone could see. That was impossible, because there are only closed door stalls in the women's restroom and the gap is quite low to the floor. They would have to be stooping and being super intrusive to tell how someone was standing or sitting in a stall. I wasn't about to ruffle any feathers cause I'm pretty sure law in my state is on the side of the trans woman. I just told them I'd look into it. I didn't, and got back to work. Then two of the trans women came to my counter and, not trying to be mean or rude, just giving the state of the situation. They were quite clockable, but they were also 10 times more polite than the screeching rednecks from before, so I didn't say anything. I almost think they knew someone was complaining. So we got to talking about coffee, because we had new equipment in the store. We are switching over from traditional coffee pots to a single cup system. They were saying how they liked it and I agreed. It had new blend I liked better. One asked how popular it was, and I admitted it could be better. These old truck drivers are set in their ways. They keep wanting the old pots to be refilled, even when I try to direct them to the new stuff. It has not been a smooth transition. The second I said it, I snapped my mouth shut. Did I just faking say that after everything that just happened? You idiot. The one lady still talking with me saw the look on my face and just laughed it off. Polite goodbye and everything. Was interviewing for a marketing internship in a 5-star hotel. There were a lot of applicants and the management didn't have enough time to interview everyone individually, so they were interviewing us by batches of 5. Anyway, I got in with someone from my uni I know and 3 strangers. When it came to my turn, the interviewer asks me why I deserve the internship, and I answer, after about 10 seconds, "I'll be the best goddamn intern you ever had," and I said it sort of like I was asking a question, and had no conviction at all. The 4 other applicants in the room turned their heads towards me when I said that, and the interviewer chuckled and asked me whether I was nervous. Thankfully I had a pretty impressive resume, so I still got the call back. Unfortunately they wanted the internship to last far longer than expected, so I had to turn it down because of other commitments. Still, I was pretty embarrassed when I said that, and I made the girl from school promise that she won't tell us all about what I did. Still have nightmares about that time. As a professional now and someone with job experience in hours interviewing people, I use that moment to teach myself to envision and prepare for scenarios that can happen, whether it may be an interview, a meeting, or even a date. Trained myself in situational conversations so that kind of thing can't happen to me again. So far I've done a good job. Last year one of my classes, being a teacher for game design, had to form teams of 5 so that they could get started with working on their game project. It was about creating a game design document collaboratively and also about getting to know their classmates a little better. One of the new engineering students came to me right after I explained the assignment. He asked, "Are we also allowed to work by ourselves without actually being part of a team?" I responded, "No. It's a team effort. You get to know your classmates and also learn how to work together." After that he repeatedly told me, "But I don't want to. I can do a way better job whenever I work solo." Eventually he said, "I don't want to join anyone. All of them suck." That comment baffled me. Since he has already started being annoying a while ago, I wanted to teach him a lesson by going up to one of his classmates. So I walk over to one of his female classmates while the rest of the class is busy finding teams and ask her, "Do you suck?" The second after that question it hit me. What the heck did I just ask her? I just wanted to make a point, but screwed it up so badly. Being aware of the sentence that had just left my mouth I improvised a bit. Luckily she responded with, "Sorry, come again. Couldn't hear you, it's too loud." I replied with something like, "No problem. AHM, do you suck at your job of being a 2D artist?" She said, "No, I hope not." I turned around and told him, "See, she doesn't suck. Now, go and find a team and be quick, otherwise you have to deal with teammates no one wants." I'm still not really over it. I'm going to start off by saying that I'm a guy and that I tend to not have a sarcasm filter when something happens that annoys me. My college roommates and I had moved into a dingy basement apartment with old as 70s era appliances and the same carpet that had been in the apartment when it flooded due to a water main break in the unoccupied apartment next to us, for which we would also be charged our entire deposit plus 100 or so for water damage when we moved out. Another story entirely. A few months later, after the junkie upstairs moved away with my only faking copy of The Big Lebowski, a new girl moved in. Her being within range of reasonably cute, my roommate decided to be the welcoming committee and dragged me along. I had been involved in a series of really shitty dates with crazy women and wasn't in the mood to deal with anyone. We get up there and her apartment is faking pristine. The final insult is the brand goddamn new appliances. At this point, we had been screwed hard by the apartment management on a number of things. This is the final straw on my filter's proverbial back, so cue me. Damn, whose dick do I have to suck to get these faking appliances? Yes, her mouth dropped open in an impressive amount of speed. My roommate, who would have to be played by Craig Robinson in a movie about this time, doesn't bat an eye and simply says, "I'm sorry about my roommate, he's crazy." I was, of course, then shoved out the door rudely by a roommate who was watching his attempt to cheat where he lived slip away, and it did. "I saved you from having an ex upstairs, man." I eventually, after a few months of her avoiding me like a normal person avoids the clap, got to apologize. She laughed. I laughed. Her frat boy boyfriend gave me a threatening look. I kept laughing. It was a good time. As an aside, if they ever have someone play me in this movie, it's going to have to be Seth Rogen. The girl in this scene would have been Jillian Bell. I don't even like my life and think this would be a funny faking movie. Not my proudest moment and definitely a reactionary question I asked while overhearing a conversation. In my freshman year of high school I was sitting with a group of guys at lunch. I was working on some homework or something, so I wasn't exactly paying attention to their conversation. They were talking about sex or their dicks, or whatever when one of them, who was on the heavier side, mentioned something about his dick, at which point something clicked in my head like that's not right, and I said, wait, you can see your dick. I immediately realized what I had said and started to apologize profusely, but the damage had been done. I'm also really good at accidentally dredging up painful memories or moments for PPL, such as first time I met a friend, really hit it off all day, had lots of fun, no parental supervision all day, so I was curious. I say to her, so where's your mom? She says, out volunteering with whoever. Okay, and where's your dad? He died 3 weeks ago. Close friend of mine's sister was diagnosed with cancer. We fell out of touch for about 3 years. When we pick back up I ask, how's your sister feeling? I hope things are getting better for her. She died 3 months ago. Same friend's son has terrible alopecia and we were joking around and he said something smart to me, so I pulled off his beanie to hit him with it. Kid had like 3 tufts of hair left on his head. I felt so terrible, but he waved it off. Now I just avoid small talk or general human interaction. Few years ago me and my old man pretty much crashed his uncle's 80th party. He hadn't looked too well all day, but still super sharp. Party ends, we leave and go back to the uncle's house. Close family piles into this little retirement flat and sets about making drinks/snacks. I'm down the hall with the old timer making sure he's okay and having a general catch up. We hear the summoning and both start to head that way. He decides to nip to the toilet, doing all sorts of shit with the Zimmer frame to get past the threshold while I'm watching on, both making jokes at his doddering. Next thing you know, the guy drops down dead, just like that. The usual bollocks happens and hours later, we are all in the living room sitting in silence/shock. I'm known for not having a filter and suddenly blurt out, "Dad, let's not ever crash someone's party again." On the plus side, at least the bastard got to go to his own wake. I was absolutely fucking mortified. I'd seriously faked up. I'm bagging myself and getting ready to apologize profusely in complete and utter shame. A few moments of pure eyeballing and wonder later, the whole room then erupted into hysterical laughter. Fuck my life. I was a server at a well-known chain restaurant. I always made sure I had the customer's bill printed out and ready after I delivered their entrees, so I could drop it anytime they needed. I was usually pretty good about gauging whether or not I could joke with my customers based on my interactions with them and their general demeanor, but I was particularly busy that night, so I was focused on just doing my job. This table, 2 older couples, maybe mid to late 50s, had just finished their entrees, so I asked, as I always do, if they were interested in dessert, specifically naming a couple of desserts like a good employee. They, as they often do, said they were full and ready for the check. Without thinking, I literally tossed the book containing their bill onto the middle of the table and said, well then here is your dessert, beaches, and then proceeded to shoot the finger guns at them. It was pretty clear by my tone of voice when I said it that I was joking around, but in that moment, I was instantly paralyzed in fear. I just stood there, eyes wide, finger guns still out of their holsters in silence, while all 4 of them just stared at me. What felt like an eternity was probably only a couple of seconds. Finally the silence was broken by chuckling as one of the gentlemen at the table pulled cash out of his wallet and reached for the book. I felt a huge amount of relief, smiled, told them to have a wonderful evening, and scurried away. Mine was actually right before I said it. A handful of years ago I was hanging out over at a buddy's house. It was 3 of us who'd been friends for a decade or so, and each of our girlfriends. I had music on my phone playing on shuffle, and one of Bo Burnham's songs, Sat, came on. My one buddy's girlfriend, who I'd met my fair share of times, but had never really gotten to know very well, exclaimed how she loved Bo Burnham, and we started talking more about him. One of the lines in the song he had changed between the first live performances and the actual production version, which was playing, so I figured that would be a nice fact to add to the conversation. The line had been changed from a joke about miscarriages to a joke about animals or something. I was explaining how he had changed the line and started to tell the old version. When about halfway through the line leading into the miscarriage remark, one remembered that my buddy he told me about a year prior that she had gotten pregnant and had a miscarriage. My mind immediately started racing at a mile a minute to try to come up with a new way to end this verse, but I guess clever song lines aren't something that can just be pulled out of your ass within seconds every time. Looking back, I would have just been better off stopping dead and acting like I forgot the punk line, but looking like an idiot never crossed my mind at the time as a method of preventing myself from looking like an asshole. So alas, I finished the joke, ended the conversation, and her and I never really did speak again before they eventually broke up. I'm an exchange student at the moment. We had a camp when we arrived in the country where we stayed for a weekend. We stayed in rooms together of 4 people, so 2 bunk beds for each room. On Saturday at around 11 I was just chilling in the main building when the leaders told us to go to our cabins and go to bed, so I headed back towards my cabin. When I walk in, there's 5 persons in the other room in the cabin, one of them my roommate, and the door to my room is closed, but I don't think much about it. I then proceed to open the door, only to find my other roommate having sex with one of the girls. I was just not expecting this and didn't know what to say, but I was thinking about the leaders telling us to go to bed, so I just blurt out, "Guys, it's time to go to bed," and walk out again, turning around to see all 5 guys from the room staring at me, and I just give them a tired look. Looking back on it now, I just think about how it must have looked like I knew they were in there, but interrupted them to say bedtime. I cringe every time I think about it. Edit. One of my friends from the other room is staying in the same town as me, so we later discussed this, and he said that he wasn't sure what my roommate was doing in there, but as soon as I turned around and looked at him with the expression I had, he knew what was going on. Had a friend in college that was in my department and shared most of my classes with me. We got along fantastically, worked really well together, and made a really good team for most things we did. I haven't had too many relationships with women that were exceptionally and successfully platonic, but this one was, at least from my perspective. We were setting up for an event on another campus. As usual, the 2 of us were running a booth, but this school wanted their students to be very involved with setup and everything else. The guy assigned to us was as dense and inspired as a brick. He kept asking me, over and over again, what he was supposed to be doing. 7 times he asked me who he should be talking to about our signage. That's Dana's apostrophe department, was my answer every time. He would then ask for clarification as to who she was. Girl with the long brown hair, girl in the pink pants, girl with the dark rimmed glasses. Never got through to him. Finally I got fed up and just yelled, the girl with the tugs the size of volleyballs. How are you missing this? The whole room went quiet, and she was standing maybe 6 feet from me. Idiot assistant says, "Oh, dude, you hitting that?" and tried to fist bump me. She had tears in her eyes. We got through that event, but at some point she said she didn't expect to add me to the list of men who couldn't see past her bra. She never really talked to me again. Still wish I could take that back. Only a couple of weeks ago, I was volunteering at a large Star Trek convention, and on this day I was organizing the queues for one of the photo booths. For this convention, as well as the standard entry tickets, there was the ability to purchase a ticket that allows you to queue jump, and I'd gotten used to a few of the holders of these tickets coming in late to the photoshoot. A few of these ticket holders were in motorized wheelchairs, having mobility problems that would prevent them certainly from managing the event like the majority of people, most likely beyond that too. We were at the very end of a photoshoot with Jason Isaacs from the latest Netflix Star Trek show, as well as being Lucius Malfoy, which confused me to begin with. I didn't know this until later, and wondered which part he played, as there were a decent number of folk dressed in Slytherin colors, but I digress. One of the other photoshoots must have been running late, as I got a bit of a rush of the queue jump pass holders right at the very end, as Jason had to return to his table. I was being asked if he was still there, and had gotten used to responding with yes, if you run. Probably shouldn't have used that phrase, as it had settled into my brain when one of the gentlemen in the motorized scooters asked me, and I essentially told him he'd only get a photo if he ran. Not my finest hour. Felt terrible for ages, until he stopped by later, and had a laugh about it. The relief was palpable. Nurse manager called me in to talk about what I was doing on night shift. I had been cutting up our printer paper and making 3D snowflakes for patients around Christmas time. I would hang them in their room while they slept. There were a few beaches on day shift that loved to start drama and reported me for introducing fire hazards into patient rooms. Our entire floor had a large amount of animosity toward this manager. She was an imbecile. We would be capped out at 6 patients and she would illegally give us 7th and 8 patients while she sat in her office. I avoided this person at all costs because I couldn't stand her being in charge of me and being so clueless. I worked 6 PM to 6 AM. She scheduled our meeting at 1 PM and wouldn't change the time. She opened up with something like, "Let's talk about what you've been doing on night shift," and I immediately said, "Let's talk about what you've been doing on day shift." "What do you mean?" Then I laid into her, told her that everyone hated being under her, and she didn't even help us at all. Everyone kissed her ass to her face, and talked shit behind her back. She didn't know, and started tearing up. Our meeting was basically an hour of me venting how much our entire floor hated her, and then I told her I had to go to sleep for my shift that started in 4 hours and left. Driving home I was like, holy shit, I better put in some applications at surrounding hospitals. Felt like shit for a few days while I waited for the wrath of God. Found out she took a promotion and was leaving our floor. The floor bought me pizza and life was good. I've lost contact with that part of the family, and I still feel terrible about it, even though many years passed. I'm an idiot, and should have never said it. Anyway, you guys want to know what kind of idiocy I came with, so here comes. My second cousin, once removed, had a very rare type of cancer. It was such a rare disease that her doctors tried to send her to the USA to be studied. She didn't go, staying here instead, and got excellent treatment and got cured. A few years later, I get in touch with this distant branch of my family after moving to the city where they live. The girl is still pretty depressed, and we become good buddies pretty fast, and we're in really good terms. Now here's a thing about my stupid self. For some reason, I just love dark humor. Cartman is a port to me, and we can all see that I'm about to say something really stupid. My cousin was so well after several years without symptoms, and since I've only met her after her disease, I've never once seen her in her bad state. We went out with our SOs, had a great evening, having gone out to eat and feeling happy. We were all on my car going back home talking about the future, and someone asks me about where I wanna be in 10 years. At this moment, I'm inspired by Cartman and say, nah, I don't worry so far into the future. I'm just like a cancer patient. I won't be around here this long anyway. Lost the girl, the friend, and the contact with that whole side of the family after this. I still beat myself over this quite often. I was backpacking and about to enter a wilderness area that required permits to camp. There were very few permitted camping spots in the area I was planning to camp, and I had extra spots on my permit that I wasn't going to use. About mid-morning I came across a woman camping by herself near the trail. As is typical conversation between hikers, I asked where she was headed. She said she didn't have permits to camp and therefore needed to hike the entire way through the designated wilderness area without stopping. In my mind I was thinking I have available spots that I could offer to share with her, unless she was with a hiking group that was larger than the number of available spots on my permit. With this in mind I asked, "Are you hiking alone?" As soon as those words left my mouth, I knew it would be taken the wrong way. I could see alarms going off in her head as she squirmed and stuttered to come up with a response. Contrary to everything she had just told me, she said she was waiting for a group of friends who would be arriving shortly. I couldn't think of any way to backtrack what I had just said, so I just wished her well and walked on. As I thought about it, I wished I would have retracted those words before she could respond. I think I could have talked my way out of it then. Knowing how vulnerable women hiking alone must feel, I thought about that the rest of the day and felt bad for how I had come across. I had one a couple weeks ago. This doesn't totally require backstory, but I'll put it anyway for the hell of it. My brother and sister have a different dad than me. Their dad is a worthless piece of shit. Got my brother into a gang at age 11. Taught him how to steal cars and burgle homes. He used to kidnap my sister from my mom when she was a little baby, still swaddled in blankets, and jump fences holding her. Class act piece of shit. My mom was eventually able to keep their dad away from my brother and sister by the time she met my dad. Well, their grandfather stepped in and visited them and went out of his way to make them feel like part of their family. Since their dad sucks so much, my mom refused to allow him to see them until they were adults. So their grandfather took over and did what their dad should have done. He would come visit once a month and take them to pizza, mini golf, the zoo, festivals, and just overall went above and beyond to give his grandkids some happy childhood memories with that side of their family. I remember him, and he was a wonderful man. Sadly, he died a couple of weeks ago. My brother, who since turned his life around completely, left the gang, moved out of state, bought 2 houses, got married and had kids of his own, flew into town. As soon as he got the news his grandfather passed, he was pretty devastated. Our mother let me know what was going on, and I asked if she could take me to the airport to get my brother. He's one of my favorite people in the world. So we get to the airport, park the car and find my brother. Greetings commence. He gives me a hug and asks how I'm doing. Instinctively, because my faking stupid as always replies to this question this way, I shrug and say I'm alive. Instant cringe. Luckily my brother knows me well enough to know that's my default answer, and he had a good chuckle over it. I still cringe when I think of it though. Oh, I have so many. In the 8th grade, my buddy told me a friend of mine was crushing on me, and I thought it was mean of him to say that since, in my mind, it should be her telling me. So I straight up went to her an hour later and told her I knew she liked me. She said okay, and then sprint walked away fast as hell. I was talking to this girl I thought was cute sophomore year, and she was pretty fit, and I don't know exactly what was said, but she asked what I look for in a girl. This was over text, and me being super smooth and cool as fuck, I said something along the lines of really nice, good with other people, but nothing over 200 pounds. Sorry guys, she might have weighed 130. So I thought I was being funny, and she would think it was funny. God, I hate myself. During the time in the last World Cup, where it was Brazil versus Mexico, my supervisor couldn't stop talking about the topic. She was a huge Brazil fan, and her husband was a huge Mexico fan. She didn't know if she should throw a party if Brazil won, because of her husband's loyalty to Mexico's team. In my mind, I was thinking, well, what if they just threw a small party in their bedroom with streamers or something? So that thought came out of my mouth as you should celebrate in the bedroom, combined with me doing this big grin like my comment was too lame. So I had to spice it up with a cheesy grin. This is at work, in front of 6 people. She's married with 2 kids, in her late 30s, and I unknowingly made a joke in front of half of the office about her having sex with her husband, whom we've all met. Another one about me being unknowingly rude as fuck to women. I was absolutely stoned out of my mind with a friend and 2 of his female friends in a bedroom. I don't know how this came up in conversation, but I think we may have been discussing what we think of other people. A girl in me and my other friend's friend group came up in conversation, and the word curvy completely slipped my mind, and I struggled to find it for a few minutes, so I tried to think about it logically. Okay, so she's not exactly at a normal weight, she's just a little bit over that. So I called her overweight. One of my friend's female friends went to her the next day and told her what I said. She didn't talk to me for a couple weeks after that, and still brings it up occasionally, even though it's been years. Another 8th grade one, a close friend at the time, was conflicted between girls he liked. One he had just broken up with, but they were talking about dating again. He had me ask this one girl if she had a boyfriend. She replied with yes, and I told him. It made him upset. An hour later, I went up to two friends who asked me how I was doing, and I replied, "Oh, I'm alright, but, friend, isn't doing too well, cause he found out, mystery woman, has a boyfriend." One of the two friends I was talking to was his ex. They haven't talked to me since that moment in the 8th grade, and I'm in my early 20s now. I was taking a film studies class at arguably the most progressive liberal community college in the US. I, 33, had to make a critique about the film, but I'm a cheerleader. I prefaced it by saying it's just my own opinion, and it's as a viewer, and not professional film critic. I said it was poorly shot and acted, was closer to a John Waters satire of gay culture. This 17 to 19-year-old girl stood up and yelled, "Gays don't have representation in film. How is this any worse than any other movie?" To which I mentioned Ang Lee's Brokeback Mountain and how well made and etc. The teacher just let her stand there and literally scream stuff across the room at me. She asked me if I'd choose a gay film over a straight film. I then said, yet another thing I regretted. I told her that I don't necessarily seek out film about sexuality, race, or gender issues. I watch movies because I like to be entertained. She then yelled, "Well, that must be real nice to have that privileged position." At this point the young lady's face was twisted and she was visibly shaking. I felt bad and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to trigger you, I meant it." Very earnestly, she lunged over her seat and yelled, "Fuck you." The teacher asked if we both needed to be removed from the class. I was shocked, as I have a deep compassion for the movement and am very left-leaning myself. I never meant to offend or hurt the young lady's feelings. We had to euthanize a very sweet old Boston Terrier who was suffering from late-stage renal failure and had ruptured an eye that morning. The owner wanted to be present, so we took him to the back to place the I/V catheter and draw up the 2 injections. Now, up to this point, no one had heard this dog make a peep, and when we touched his paw to shave he screamed. This dog had never had a problem with blood draws or anything really, so it caught all of us off guard. The owner at the front of the hospital, unfortunately, could hear him. We did close the doors between the front and back and calmed him down so we could continue. I was the one with the dog and the doctor. I did not know the owner was freaking out over the scream she heard, or that my coworker had told her not to worry, and it was one of the office cats. So of course when I bring the dog back to them to visit with before the procedure I say yes it was him when asked. The second I said yes I knew it was not the right thing to say. Her face fell, and she broke down. I felt so bad. This Boston had been one of her favorites. This all happened months ago, and I still feel crappy about it. I'd like to preface this by saying this happened a long time ago, and I'm still very ashamed. Have you ever thought of a joke that sounded funny in your head, but ended up being horrible and bigoted once you said it? In the 7th grade, I was friends with a Jewish kid. We'll call him Jack. Within our small group of friends, we'd constantly make jokes about each other, some of which weren't exactly okay. I was horrifyingly skinny, so Jack nicknamed me Twig Beach. Our mutual friend Sam had Docker skin, so Jack called him Burnt Cinnamon Roll, and Sam took the obvious route and called Jack Dirty Jew. I'm just trying to communicate the kind of relationship we had. To, if not excuse, explain my actions. Jack, Sam, and I were sitting in math, and I decided to come up with a joke about Jack. We did it all the time, making jokes that would be very offensive to anyone else, but I'd never done it after a couple of minutes. I'd finished. I went up to Jack and asked if I could tell him a joke. What follows is the worst thing I have ever said to this day. Once there was a boy named Jake who decided he didn't want to be human, so he became a Jew. The moment I finished saying it, and I saw his face, I knew I'd taken it too far. I apologized profusely, and it didn't seem to bother him too much, but everyone agreed it was really messed up. Jack and I continued to be friends after that, but 2 of my friends would only refer to me as Hitler for a week or 2 afterwards. Actually recent, but I spent 8 hours from 6 AM in the morning at a bakery. It was my first time and most people I worked with were my age and understood/got along with my humor and everything was good. After helping this one girl all day and no issues, making jokes and all good, I asked her what I could do to help, and she gave me a much easier and simpler task than any before of simply taking a tray to the back. Without thinking about it, I said with a silly tone, how about you go fuck yourself, and I saw from the look on her face that she didn't like that and definitely took it literally. I apologized profusely, tried to explain that I meant it as joke after everything, and I genuinely didn't mean it like that, and she seemed to understand, and wasn't a big deal. I apologized twice later, and when the day was over and all seemed good, I showed up the next day to work, and got the boss lady yelling at me in front of everyone at 6 AM saying I cannot work here, and I must leave for the not very nice things I said to X. I mean, I totally get it, and I did say that, so I didn't make a fuss, and did as she asked, but I do wish I could have explained to her what my intention was, or maybe she didn't have to do it in front of everyone, so they all think I meant it with malicious intent. Overall, it's a good life lesson to pay more attention to what the fuck is coming out of my dumb mouth. The same joke that I wanted to imply by saying that could have easily been said with less harsh words and the whole situation avoided. So a long time ago at a church camp meeting, I was asked to sit with a girl that had disabilities who was also a tad simple. I hung out with her for a while, but I was only about 12 or 13 and wanted to go hang out with my friends. I saw that she was surrounded by a few of her own friends, so I asked if she would be okay, then headed off to find my own buddies. Later her mom approached me and asked how it had gone, since she had been the one that asked me to visit with her child for a while. I said that we had hung out some, and then her other friends were there, so I went to the volleyball court to hang out with my friends. I think she asked me why I left, and I just shrugged and blurted out I got bored. I immediately wished passionately for a magical watch that I could use to redo the last minute in my life, or that the ground would open up and swallow me. I'll never forget the look on her face, like she wanted to start smacking everyone who had ever said mean things about her child and their situation to her, starting with me. I stammered out an apology over and over again, and she just kind of nodded and said it's okay and walked away. It was not okay. To this day I wish I could take that back. I don't know what my dumb, prepubescent, hormone-saturated brain was thinking to blurt out to a woman that I was incredibly bored to hang out with her physically disabled, mentally challenged daughter. Growing up, I was always taught that I was the salt of the earth, but that day I was sure that my youth pastor was mistaken about me in particular, because I had just acted like the scum of it. Background: my first job was at the cash of a gas station. It was horrible. I was 17 and people would call me a thief, throw their money at me, threaten to job me, call me names, etc. I was always very nervous when it came to selling cigarettes, because I didn't smoke, and there were so many different kinds I had no idea what was what. Anyway, one day a deaf lady comes in to buy cigarettes. It's the first time I hear a deaf woman speak, and I'm having a hard time understanding her. That plus that she was buying something I was unfamiliar with meant I kept giving her the wrong kind. She's screaming, becomes harder to understand, and gesturing violently over the counter at what she wants. I eventually get it right. I was really upset by this interaction, and told my friend about it after my shift. Her brother starts imitating the woman's voice, and well, I'm 17, and annoyed and dumb, and it caught on. A few years later I'm in a class at school and I did the voice to a friend next to me. She's like, what the fuck was that? So I whispered, I do this really awful thing where I make fun of deaf people. I know it's terrible. Another girl spins around. Did you say you make fun of how deaf people talk? Me, yes, I know it's so bad. Her, both my parents are deaf. I immediately started to apologize profusely. She said, oh, don't worry, my mom thinks it's so ugly when they try to talk. I knew I would get caught one day and I totally deserved it. Oh, I have a good one. One time, in HS, my friend and I were trying to cheer up our mutual friend whose friend had threatened to commit then disappeared, and the guy we were trying to cheer up loved anti-jokes. So, basically, we had up a list of anti-jokes, and were just reading the ones we felt funny to him on Skype video call, which was totally working, until I said it. I saw a joke that made me giggle, and without thinking, just said it. Why did the chicken cross the road during rush hour? To commit suicide. And then as a laugh died in my throat, I realized what I had just reminded him of, and flat out got up from the bed, went to the bathroom, and cried because I felt like such an asshole. He was really nice about it, but I still think about it sometimes and feel horrible. Also, bonus story, last night my boyfriend's friend told us not to close a door to his bedroom on him, because they lock automatically in the house we are in, and my asshole self immediately replied sarcastically, "No, we are gonna lock you in, teach you a lesson for being a little shit." In the middle of this my boyfriend is like, no babe, he's sensitive about that, and I just remember that he used to get locked in a big cage in the garage for time out as a kid, and immediately followed up with, "Kidding, we would never do that. You are safe and sound here, I promise," but still felt pretty bad. I should probably start thinking before I speak more tbh. Best one I can think of is this. Setting/backstory. I was at my computer playing my most recent game I was into, which was Skyrim, and my husband was near me playing on his computer, more than likely playing a Blizzard game. I recently discovered you can buy houses in the game, but was impatient to traverse the lands and build up enough gold and resources to buy an add-on to the house, so decided to see what the internet suggested. Looking up on the internet I discovered cheat codes for the game and promptly started to use them, and made a nifty little house for myself. Once done I started to regret it, because once you use cheat codes, at least for me, some of the fun is removed from the game, so I decided to confess to my husband. I turn and look over at him, and being serious about my cheating in the game I say husband's name, "I cheated." And that's all I said to him. He looks over at me with this confused look on his face, and my mind finally processes what I said. I just told my husband I cheated and nothing more in context. He knows me and knows I wouldn't cheat on him, so me confessing that I had cheated really threw him in for a loop of what the hoot thinking. Anyways, once I realized my mistake on wording, I nipped anything else in the bud by explaining my cheating on Skyrim and making a house with the cheat codes. Let's just say it's now a joke in my house. Hold about me cheating that gets brought up on occasion as a story. So moral of the story, watch what you say and make sure you tell the whole story, not just the cliff notes. Oftentimes, my boss will push a customer in my office to do paperwork for purchasing a vehicle, even if my paperwork isn't ready, because either they are a VIP customer who doesn't want to wait, basically line jumping anyone else who has been waiting there, or the customer is having second thoughts. It's so annoying. They always want to talk while you are still trying to load all their paperwork in the system, and multitasking a full-on conversation while trying to focus on making sure the paperwork is 100% compliant can be quite difficult. I tend to let customers do the talking while I throw in random "really, wow," or "that's pretty neat." It's not that I'm not genuinely interested in what they're saying, they just don't realize I need to fully focus on the task at hand, or it will be missing something, or spelling or financial errors could be made. One day, I carried on a full conversation like this to the point that the customer asked me for my business card at the end, stating that it had been such a long time she had gotten along so well with anyone. She has texted me several times since. My personal cell is on my card, because typically my cards are distributed to bank reps, not customers. She came in the store the other day, and I didn't even recognize her. I see hundreds of customers each month. And she started asking me about our conversation from the last time she had been there. I couldn't tell you a thing she had said while I was loading her paperwork. And it made for an awkward situation in which she said, "You don't remember me, do you?" At which point I wasn't sure what the most polite thing to say was, so I was super relieved when I was paged over the intercom and excused myself, telling her, "Oh, that's me, I'll catch up with you later." A few weeks ago, I had a driving lesson. My instructor arrived, and I walked out to meet him. He seemed a bit off, and after settling into the car he told me that his mother had passed away the night before, so he wasn't doing great, but if I was okay with it, he still wanted to do the lesson, to take his mind off it for a little while. I had no issue with that, so we set off. I don't know what was up with me that day exactly, but the lesson was horrible. I couldn't focus, I kept making stupid mistakes, and I was generally feeling down and defeated. Test was the week after. So we took a little break in a parking lot after a particularly stressful moment, and I blurted out, "Hey, at least we are still alive." I immediately felt everything inside shrivel up with regret. Bonus. So, a week later, my test took place and fortunately I passed. I was extremely happy, and I started making phone calls and sending texts to friends and family while my instructor was driving me back home. Then I got the brilliant idea I could FaceTime my mother in the car. During the FaceTime call she asked if she could thank my instructor, and he had no issues with that. So they had a cute little conversation. Mother lives in my home country and her English is not great. Laughs were had, and that was that. Afterwards, when I got home, it suddenly hit me that I had happily called my mother in front of someone who had just lost this and then made him talk to her on top of that. He didn't seem to mind at all in the moment, but I felt like such a prick. I was working for a talk radio network. We were going through a reorganization and several people were fired, but all of the hosts and co-hosts of the actual shows were safe. After everyone who was actually fired was fired and gone, I was the admin tasked with going around giving people paperwork explaining that everyone was fired from the old company and hired by the new company. We changed ownership. Well, I went into the office of our flagship show, whose host was famous and the co-host was a prominent journalist and host in her own right, and since The Apprentice was a new and exciting sheet at the time, thought it was a good idea to say to the co-host in front of the famous host and their intimidating producer, insert name, "You're fired," with the Donald Trump hand motion and voice inflection and everything. SMH. The look on her face instantly told me I faked up, and before I could do or say anything to rectify the situation or explain why I was in the room in the first place, her host and producer tried to push me out of the room, and the co-host popped up and goes, "I need to go have a cigarette." That was in 2004. It's literally been 14 years. I can remember it all like it was yesterday. I regret it so much. It wasn't funny. People had been fired left and right, and our entire company future was uncertain. I was 23 years old and the administrative assistant to the CEO, COO, president, and CFO of the company. I was the one who they asked to go and retrieve people who were going to be fired and bring that person to their office. I was very young to be given that much responsibility, and I think something broke in me, and I forgot how heavy a situation our company was in. SMH. So I bumped into a guy I loosely knew from church at a fast food place. He had been in an accident at some point and was a paraplegic as a result. I don't know exactly when it happened or what happened, but he had a beautiful little family consisting of himself, his wife, and 3 kids. The last time I had seen him his youngest daughter was just learning how to walk. I love children, so I enjoyed watching her try to make her steps and falling down, but getting up and trying again. It was so sweet. So anyway, this time when I ran into him, he had his little daughter with him, and she was walking all by herself with the biggest smile on her face. I said something to the effect of, "Look at how happy she is." Learning to walk for the first time must be so liberating. Just the freedom of being able to finally walk, it has to just be such a good feeling for her. And honestly, at the time I didn't think anything of it. I mean, this guy's in a wheelchair, but he's very upbeat, and I guess I just never saw him as being any different from myself. It wasn't until sometime later that I started thinking to myself, did I really say that? Am I that tone deaf? Yikes. This is the embarrassing moment that keeps me up at night from time to time. The worst part is I have no idea what his name was, since I moved away from there several years ago and only knew him a short time, so I can't even track him down and apologize, or maybe even laugh about it with him. I don't know if he thought anything of it, or maybe it ruined his day, and he remembers me as that one as whole. I just wish I knew. I was conscripted into taking part in a 50-meter race on a sports day at my ex's nephew's quaint little English countryside parish primary school. As an incredibly self-conscious awkward 19-year-old I nervously went up to the starting line feeling like I was in the bloody Olympics or something. My contenders were a little girl and boy who were about 5 years old each and an old lady pushing 70. Running for the first time in about 6 years was a bit of a shock, and before I knew it, I sparked off a competitive edge I didn't even know I had. I looked behind me and saw that the kids and the old lady were really eating my dust, so I thought I would set an example, as any good English sportsman should, by not finishing first and looking like a total dick in front of everyone. I forgot a simple law of physics however, and only realized as an unstoppable horror played out in front of me, like rolling out a red carpet full of sick. As I passed the tents where the school children and local kind old vicar were watching, and having a rest from the wonderful sunshine, I instantly slowed my running speed, which led to me face planting the floor and tumbling forwards on my hands and knees. It probably would have been able to play this off quite well had I not let out the loudest fuck of my life. I think the only thing louder was the collective gasp from just about every parent, sibling, aunt, uncle and holy man in attendance. As I got to my feet and brushed off all the dry grass, I watched, several dozen meters ahead of me, as an old lady, a little girl and a little boy crossed the finish line. TLDR, let loose the loudest F-bomb I've ever produced in front of an entire primary school students, parents and extended family, and a vicar for an extra bonus point. A bit of backstory. I became friends with a kid a couple grades behind me in high school named Daniel. We had some of the same friends, one of which was Will. On just one occasion I happened to go to Will's house and met his parents. They were extremely nice people, and that was the last time I ever saw them. Fast forward 15 years or so, I'm Daniel's brother-in-law and he's asked me to officiate his wedding. Honored, I became internet ordained, ready to crush it as officiant. On the day of the rehearsal, Daniel, 4 other friends, and myself were enjoying our first glass of morning wine and some silliness at the Vineyard venue. Then from out of nowhere came a pat on my shoulder. I turned and saw Will for the first time in 10 plus years. I got overly excited, and next part all happened so quickly. I shouted, "Will, great to see ya." My attention instantly turned to the woman I had only just realized was standing by him. I instantly extended my hand for a greeting and said, "Oh, and this must be your mom." Her face changed in a very subtle what the fuck kind of way. Will smiled. As she bewilderingly shook my hand, he said, "This is my girlfriend Sarah." The circle went silent, but vibrating with an uncomfortable urge to implode with laughter. She looked so much like the only memory of Will's mom I had. Nope, not his mom. It was his girlfriend, who by the way, was 20 years older than him. I apologized immediately, and many more times thereafter, and she was very cool about it. I nearly kicked my teeth out jamming my foot in my mouth on that one. My dude still won't let me live that down. Cheers everyone. So, I'm a maintainer in the military, and I have a very crude sense of humor. I had been stationed overseas for several years, so I basically only was around other crude maintainers for those years, making my crude sense of humor that much more crude. Anyway, fast forward to coming home and being invited to a Halloween party at a college where several of my good friends from high school are attending. We are at a very crowded bar, dressed up in costumes and several drinks in. There was a lull in the conversation, and one of the girls in our group starts to complain about a guy back home, saying he's a piece of shit. Fuck that guy. So me and my tipsy maintainer said, "What did he do? Rap you?" As soon as those words left my mouth, I swear you could hear the record scratch to a stop. People I have been friends with for a decade looked at me like I was a baby killer. One asked me, "You think rap is funny?" My response, "I think everything is funny." It totally made me rethink my sense of humor, because as faked up as it is, that would have got laughs with my fellow maintainers. Also, I apologized to her the next day. She laughed it off. She's actually married to that guy now, so. But yeah, I made a rap joke at a college. Instant regret. I said something just 5 days ago that made me want to crawl into the closest hole in the ground and bury myself. My son was born, and I'm on cloud 9 for the minutes immediately following his birth. I'm walking around the delivery room saying, "That was amazing. I can't believe how beautiful that mess was. I'm so happy. You're amazing, honey. I'm so proud of you." And that was all good. But then I topped it off with, "That was way better than our wedding day." Idiot faking idiot. All I meant to say was that I now have a new best moment of my life. Getting married was incredible, but I hate having all of the attention on me. The birth of my son was so incredible because it was a moment I was waiting for so long, but no one's eyes were in me. Even the nurses turned to me with these expressions on their faces that said I need to unsay that somehow. That certainly isn't the dumbest thing I've ever said, but the timing is what made it so atrocious. I backtracked so hard I was damn near moonwalking out of the room. TLDR, I told my wife immediately after childbirth that the birth of our son was way better than our wedding day. I'm using this post as a way to explain myself to the universe and beg for forgiveness. So I was at a coffee shop sipping my beverage and discussing a book that I was reading with a fine female companion. Anyway, we were talking about this one French theorist's ideas on contemporary philosophical discourse when we were interrupted by the sound of what seemed to be a dog howling. Annoyed after 5 minutes of trying to discuss this book with the aforementioned female over the sounds of a dog howling, I decided to be the man that I am and tell this pet owner to control their faking animal. Keep in mind that this coffee shop had an outdoor area that I was seated in, and the supposed howling dog was right outside the wall that I was too short to see over. This is where shit gets real. I walked with the swagger of 2000s up to the gate of the wall to show my female companion that our conversation was worth causing a disturbance. I kicked open the gate, causing everyone outside to look my way, and immediately yelled, "Put a muzzle on that faking thing." I looked over my shoulder, behind me, to see if the crowd had affirmed my action, and to my shock, horror, surprise, and disgust, they were all looking at me as if I had just killed a baby. You see, when I kicked open the door, I never looked at the source of the noise, which incidentally happened to be a mentally disabled young man in a wheelchair, 8, 11-ish maybe, making loud noises. When I realized what I had said and its implications, something amazing happened, and now I can talk to animals. It's really cool, but totally secret. And you know what? Life's never been the same. Just kidding. But seriously, the walk back to my backpack, though 15 feet maximum, was the worst walk of my life. The boy's mother/caretaker immediately got on her cell phone to call what I presume to be the police. I paid for my and the female's coffee with a credit card, so they had to get my name. I'm currently at home, waiting for the police to call me for what is sure to be a hate crime. The girl told me she would rather walk home alone. I worked in a jail for a few years, and one day, I went into a housing unit to visit with my friend, who was the deputy on duty there. A lot of inmates would roll up paper towels or toilet paper to put in their ears when they slept, because it was loud in there. Well, anyways, I was as smart as nearly all the time. So this guy comes up to the officer's desk and asks my friend what time they are coming to get him for court. My friend tells him, and the guy says, "Huh." My friend speaks a little louder and tells him. The inmate says thank you, and then laughs, and said he did not hear him the first time. So, without hesitation, I yell, "Why don't you get the sheet out of your ears next time?" Because I thought he had toilet paper in his ears and forgot to take it out. Well, he was partially deaf and those were his hearing aids. The entire housing unit goes dead silent, and my friend immediately fills me in on why what I said was so wrong. I felt like shit, but being the young and immature dumb as I was, I doubled down and said, "Calm down, everyone, it's not like he can hear me." At that moment, as soon as the words left my mouth, I wished I could pull them back in, and I realized I had better leave and press the call button to have the door unlocked. It was maybe 20 seconds before control opened the door, but it felt like an hour. I did pull the guy aside later that day and apologized to him. We talked for a bit in private, and he accepted my apology. He was actually one of the good inmates and we never had issues with him. I saw him at Target one day a few months later, and he came up to me and joked with me about that day. We laughed, but deep down, it made me feel like shit again. So, as a preface, this was a few years ago, when I was in college. My roommate and I played a lot of Xbox 360 at the time, and one of the XBL arcade games he had was a rhythm game called Techno Kitten Adventure. It's a winter month, and I'm really pining after this girl, Celine. I get a call one night that her cat, a really cute little faker, got hit by a car amidst the traffic following a college football game. She lived near the stadium. Naturally, myself and several of her friends came over in consolation. Mind you, at this time, I smoked weed, but hadn't really built that much of a tolerance. I'd still feel cloudy, and oftentimes my thoughts just came out of my mouth without me really taking the time to process what I'm saying. They're passing a bong around, like we're making weed toasts in memory of our feline friend, and soon Celine's roommate brings up rhythm games. In my head, excited about something I can talk about with this guy, I'm immediately like, oh dude, RHYTHM games are great. We briefly touched on DDR, the merits of Guitar Hero vs Rock Band, before I mention my roommate having a cool indie game on Xbox. Of course, the guy asked what it was. Of course, I answered, words slowing to a creep as I speak them. It's called Techno Kitten Adventure. Everyone turns to me, in unison, and just says, really? I hadn't even been there 15 minutes yet. This one was recently, and in a very small workplace to a very mouthy person. I'm also not familiar with being politically correct, or paying attention to the world at large, and only know broad generalizations about people. I also make statements that can be equivocated to me being a stoner, but I'm not one. I'm just a dumb man. So when I think of Egyptians, I think of ancient Egyptians, not people currently living in Egypt. But one night this mouthy co-worker was driving me home, and the conversation went like this. Co-worker, boy, I'm beat. When I get home I'm going to sleep like an Egyptian. Me, haha, cause they're dead. At this point I didn't realize he meant ancient Egyptians, and so I asked. Me, wait, do we still call the people who live in Egypt Egyptians now? Cue him calling our boss on speakerphone and us having a big laugh riot over it. I looked it up when I got home, and most of that area is populated by people who are Arab/Muslim/ECT point, so they don't get referenced as Egyptians as I understand it, but you can still reference them as such. If I'm incorrect here, please correct me. I was very much unable to get a clear answer here. I'm eager to know how that generally works. Anyway, now he faking tells everyone what I said, so the first impression anyone gets of me in my new department is that I'm an insensitive dumbass. The day the R word disappeared from my vocabulary, I used to go to this daycare center in 4th grade. Usually it was just before and after school, but in the summer between 4th and 5th grade, I went all day. Was bored off my ass basically the entire time. But occasionally I could have a good time playing with the other kids. One of these kids had Downs, and she and I started playing at the public pool. After that day, she became my best friend at daycare. We had a great time the rest of the summer. After that summer my mom had quit her job and they pulled me out of daycare. Fast forward a couple of years, and I'm in 6th grade with a gal that was also at that daycare at the same time as me. We were catching up and I, quite loudly as I was excited about the answer, just blurt out, hey, do you remember girl's name, that retarded chick? Now I knew that that was possibly the worst way I could have asked that question, but I was an excited, idiot 12-year-old, and I was too dumb to rephrase it in my head before I said it. But worse was when her eyes narrowed and she got mad and responded, yeah, that's my sister. I don't think I've ever felt more shame or embarrassment in my life. It crushed me to think that she thought I was mocking my best friend that summer, and in general I just felt like shit. Years later, I ran into the gal from my 6th grade class again at a store at which she was working/managing, and I just didn't know how to handle it. I wanted so much to apologize, or ask her about her sister, or try and explain myself. But the shame I was feeling in that moment was every bit as much as it was in 6th grade. So I just kinda got quiet and spoke only what was absolutely necessary. I'm sure she didn't have the greatest image of me in her head prior to that meeting, and I'm sure it was cemented afterwards. And that's what a giant heap of shame can do for ya, for making a dumb choice of words when you have the best of intentions. I've probably said a number of things I regretted instantly afterwards, but I think possibly the biggest one was the utterance of a few words that were the last straw that led to the breaking up of my first long-term relationship. The words were yeah, I heard you, or thereabouts. Loose translation from our native language. My girlfriend at the time had gone on a trip of her life so far in Asia, and in retrospect it was probably a life-changing experience for her. She had been struggling a lot with self-esteem and other issues, and after a long-ish struggle, and me trying to support her, she ended up having courage to go on that trip. I wasn't traveling with her. It was more of her thing with friends she had met some time before, and also I had been having a hard time with work and our relationship for a number of months and honestly didn't have the energy to even think about going on a long trip. The relationship had a bunch of unresolved issues, partially due to me failing to communicate my concerns and partially because there just were a lot of problems. It was emotionally fairly exhausting. So, I could also use a vacation from her. During her trip we had mostly communicated by a few texts, her shared voice journal and maybe a couple of Skype calls. Then one night she called me on the phone. I had just got home from work that I hated, and that was burning me out, and I was exhausted. She had contracted diarrhea, or whatever, and was feeling ill, and wanted to call me. I somehow mustered the strength to be empathetic to her feeling ill, although to be honest, I was so out of juice for the day that I probably wanted nothing more than to just mind my own business. Then, all of a sudden she switched from her complaining to an affectionate voice and said, "I've been missing you." I was somehow caught off guard, having barely had the mental energy to tune in with her feeling ill. I obviously should have reciprocated her feeling. But in half a second I realized I had actually not been missing her that much at all, and had almost appreciated not having to deal with her for a moment. I couldn't bring myself to tell the white lie that I had been missing her too, so my brain came up with something ingenious instead. I said, "I've been missing you," she repeated, thinking the line might have been breaking up. Me, yeah, I heard you. Her, me, her, let's talk when I get back home. Granted, the relationship had already turned kind of toxic anyway, and would probably have failed soon one way or the other, but nevertheless the moment I had blurted out those words and she ended the call, I felt like I had dropped 10 pounds of sheet directly into a running fan. And I had, edit, a couple of tiny details. My 21st birthday party. I had to organize everything, because if I would have left it up to my family, it wouldn't have happened. Invite everyone, get RSVPs, book the restaurant, get explained seating, is tight and numbers matter, if more come than expected they cannot be seated with us. Brother's wife doesn't want to come. Good. She's never really liked me anyway. Confirm the seating plan. Turn up at the restaurant a little late, because it was my birthday and a friend wanted to have a quiet drink with me. You guessed it, brother's wife is there, bawling her eyes out, because she can't sit at our table. Explain to everyone who is pissed at me for not telling them that it's out of my control, and she said she didn't want to come. Nobody believes me. Brother's wife becomes martyr and says it's fine. It's a birthday, don't spoil it, and leaves. Everybody has an awkward time because I'm the faker who excluded my sister-in-law. 2 weeks later, I was in the shower just mulling over memories, and I said out loud to faking late, "You already spoiled it for everybody." Yeah. I should have said that. 10 by comparison, I know, but at the time in the shower I wasn't even thinking about it, so it always kinda stuck with me, lol. As some backstory, I work as part of the maintenance team in a museum. There are lots of people in the museum who have worked there for 30+ years. Back in the 80s there were two brothers who worked in a specialist role in the department. We'll call them K and E. They were both clearly very liked across the museum, with lots of friends in all departments. When the department slimmed down, D took redundancy and went and worked elsewhere. Years later K retired. There was also far less requirement for their specialist work, so rather than replace with a full-time employee we started getting D back in every third weekend. A few years on K unfortunately dies, but given that D works weekends the news doesn't spread particularly far or wide. Cut to a new gallery opening party I'm taking to a lady who we'll call E. Has worked at the museum for many years and was great friends with K and D back in the day. We get talking about the fact that D was in the previous weekend. E asks how he's getting on, usual chit chat. Then he asks how K is these days. Without a thought at all, completely straight-faced, but in a rather upbeat tone, because it's a happy event and we're all having a bit of a laugh and a chat, I respond. He's dead. This, it turns out, is a complete shock to E. Her friend is dead. She had no idea at all. She's now stood in a busy gallery full of jovial people, barely holding back tears, and trying to take in the news, while I grab at my own mouth trying desperately to somehow pull the words back in. He thankfully was fine with me, and accepted I hadn't meant to be so callous. I'll never feel right about it though. Story requires a preface, so here it goes. TLDR included at the end. This all happened almost 1 year ago exactly. Had fallen for my best friend at the time's girl. We had gotten pretty close over the time I knew her, but we always kept it on a close friend level. Couldn't stand to see best friend and his girlfriend together, because friend was a bit man-ho-ish so to speak, and didn't like how he'd act around other chicks when his girlfriend wasn't around. Started to get under my skin more and more, and told my friend about it, and that I couldn't be around him anymore. He understood and stopped inviting me out to stuff, which sucked, but that was how we handled it. We split on good terms. Hugged it out and everything. This didn't stop his girlfriend from wanting to hang out, however. At the time it was too uncomfortable to tell her anything, so we'd still go on like everything was normal. So she would come over to my place, and we'd get high and watch random shit on the internet or just talk and laugh. After a while I couldn't do this anymore. The love was growing, and the resent along with it. Had invited her out to eat, just me and her, so I could tell her how I felt, and let her know I wasn't gonna be around anymore. Dinner went by, think we spent 3 to 4 hours just talking, but couldn't build up the courage to tell her till I was already driving her home. She understood but thought that me distancing myself from her wasn't serious, and that we would still talk and stuff. After she had gotten out of the car, and she was at her door, I had gotten out to say the last thing I had on my mind, before I regretted not doing so. So I said, I wish it didn't have to be like this. I wish I had met you sooner. Now in my head, I meant it, like I wish I had met you sooner, so that this shitty part of my life was over already, and was nothing but a bad memory. In reality it came off as, I wish I had met you before the other guy did, and she took it as a huge show of disrespect for her relationship. Realized how it sounded, right after I said it. She only messaged me once afterward, to say her final goodbye, and we haven't talked since. I miss her, man. Wish I could go back in time, so I could shoot myself, before I said that stupid thing. TLDR. Told my old best friend's girlfriend I fell in love with, that I wish I was in a further part of my life, so leaving, so separating from her world already past, and had been a bad memory. Came off super disrespectful to her thanks to my inability to formulate ideas into sentences.